Over 300 years ago, 11 ships set sail for Australia on a trip that took 8 months. But we're hoping to do it in 30 days. And we're hoping to do it in this, on the London to Sydney Marathon. This rally would pitch the modern Group N cars, which have only limited modifications, against the classic and historic rally cars, which have virtually unlimited modifications. And the hope was that this would provide a good battle between the two different types of car. And one of the first away was a monster Holden, the noise from its exhaust making small children cry and scaring the birds from the trees. The Callanans then went out to make some noise. And despite the size and power of the car, Keith really pushed it through the tight British Forest stages. With Joe Mcandrew, the first and the fastest of the modern cars, it was fascinating to compare the performance of the modern and historic machinery with a perfect mix of cars filling the top 10 places. After an overnight ferry from Portsmouth, we were now in France and set for a long day with a couple of tarmac stages thrown in. Indeed, it was going to be interesting to see how the historic cars would perform on tarmac. Old they may be, but bolstered by the latest in modern technology, they were all very powerful and very light, and they took 4 of the top 5 positions on this stage. Although that might have had a little bit to do with this. Joe Mcandrew always wants to be quickest, and here was no exception. Needless to say, he wanted to get out in a bit of a hurry, so even our cameraman helped, but the watching spectators refused to. This was all a big surprise to the following competitors, and no doubt a development that caused huge amusement amongst the Toyota crews. We've got their measure, Graham Lorimer had said just a few minutes before, but even he probably didn't expect things to swing their way quite so quickly. After 3 days, maybe surprisingly leading the rally overall now, was the huge monster 5-litre 500 horsepower Holden Monaro of Keith and Mary Ann Callanan. He might not get round the corners too well, but it simply flew down the straights. Although that much smoke coming from your exhaust is never a good sign, it has to be said. And it wasn't too long before they started to drop down the field again. This was all good news for Joe Mcandrew, who only seems to know one way to drive, and that's flat out. And he set a time 20 seconds quicker than anyone else on the day's first stage, and was already back into the top 10 after his previous days off. But now in the lead were Jimmy McRae and Bruce Lyle, driving cleanly and professionally, and doing just what was needed, although bothered by the Monaro's smoke stream, which in the still calm air was lingering for ages.
A lot of smoke from this car in front, the Monaro hanging in the trees.
Well, there was a lot of it. One of the most difficult things to get used to is the marathon mindset. It's only 9 o'clock in the morning, we've finished the day's 2 stages already, and we've now got a 9.5 hour road section to the evening halt. So by rights we should be there at 6:30. Let's hope it's a nice trip. And it was a pleasant trip. This was only day 4 of the London to Sydney Marathon, but it was already becoming apparent that the road sections would be just as important as the stages, only in a different way. The stages generally only made up about half an hour of each day, whereas the road sections were as much as 12 hours long, and were very tiring for both car and crew. And yes, that is the road that we just drove along. But at least the organisers had made the effort to always take us along the most interesting routes. This was certainly an event that would live up to its marathon name. Towards the end of the trip, we came up behind the Holden Monaro, which was still running and not smoking anymore. And when we arrived at the evening halt, we were able to ask him why it had been smoking so badly.
Because the piston let go and then it became very smoky and the people behind us couldn't see. And I panicked and then I slowed down and then I tried to get Marianne to make a phone call while we were driving through the stage, which does tend to slow you down somewhat.
We were now in Italy, with 2 runs of the same 2 stages ahead of us. And on the first stage it was Anthony Ward's turn to be quickest in the Mark 1 Escort. And if you wonder how these 40-year-old cars can be so quick, let me reassure you, they are not 40 years old. They are newly built by Historic Rally Sport and have nearly 240 horsepower in a car that weighs about 2/3 the weight of the modern car. There were, though, the warnings of problems for Simon Glover, with its clutch showing signs of failing. This Ford Mustang is a big growly car, and it's driven by a big growly driver.
Going extremely well.
You were flying around there today?
Thank you. I enjoyed the stages. They're a bit tight for this car, but didn't matter. We're just a lot of uphill stuff, so the car enjoyed it. I enjoyed the drive, so had a great time.
But for Nelson and Nick Marshall, this was the start of what was to be their last stage of the rally. Running just behind them on the road, and having a whale of a time of it, it has to be said, we were once again aware of a warning triangle, an OK board, a crew member, and then firmly up against a tree, a seriously wrecked Capri.
Blimey.
500 metres downhill.
This car was knackered, and the roll cage had collapsed.
Yeah, we were held up for quite a while with that Porsche for about 3 or 4 kilometres. He wouldn't move over.
Oh yeah.
Of course, I got a bit off, and when I finally passed him, I gave it a big bootful in the corner, tightened, and it's all my own fault.
It was already becoming obvious that trying to do this event without your own service backup was actually the hardest thing about the rally. Just look at the setups of some of the other crews here, and you can see what Terry and I were up against. Even changing your car onto tarmac tyres for the next road section and the day stages becomes a bit of a drag when you're sometimes having to do it twice a day. And then it was on to the stages. Superb, wide open, fast, and it has to be said, a bit rocky. But isn't this what rallying is all about? Driving as fast as you can on roads like this. We were really enjoying ourselves until...
$500 over crest.
Got a puncture. How far to go? Left puncture.
About K. Over crest.
With only a few minutes between this stage and the next one, this was not the time to have to change a wheel. And in full racing gear, and with the sun scorching down on my black overalls, I couldn't have been much hotter if I'd put myself in an oven. Thing is, when we get to the other time control anyway, we'll get there on time, and then we've still got 20 minutes. Yeah. There'll still be the delay again because of the 2-minute Watsons. We don't have to worry about tyre pressures yet. It's a bit disappointing though. After this, I was just about shattered and decided to ask Mark Soloway if his mechanics could help us out from time to time when necessary. And such is the level of camaraderie on a rally like this, they were happy to. Both of the historic Rally Sport Run Escorts were running in the top 10 of the rally, with Simon Glover and Russ Langthorne 6th overall and leading the historic category, and Anthony Ward and team boss Mark Soloway 9th overall and 3rd in the historics. The beauty of these cars is that they look like the original specification Mark 1 Escorts, even if the regulations allow quite a lot of suspension modifications nowadays. The engines are also much more highly tuned, although here they only gave out about 240 horsepower after Mark detuned them for this rally. But don't they look like the cars that did the original marathon events in the late 60s and early 70s? With their cars checked, the mechanics amused themselves by checking our car over, and I think they were a little surprised by just how standard it was. With our car having had a quick check over, it was amazing how much more confident I felt, and our time through here was pretty good as well. Nowhere near the front runners, of course, but it was very good for us. And then off we went to the airport to be greeted by this extraordinary sight. This was one of the two Antonovs especially converted to airlift all the vehicles to India. The trouble was, it takes a long time to pack these cars on here, as they literally have to be loaded and strapped in, one at a time. Then it was my turn, and it all seemed pretty straightforward from the inside. But from the outside, you can see just how close I was to losing the boot. We at last had reached Australia, our final destination on this extraordinary adventure, and we all immediately felt at home. Even the fish in the harbour at Darwin were reassuringly welcoming, and these were a far cry from the man-eating sharks and deadly jellyfish that we'd been warned about. We were now setting off right into the middle of the Australian outback, where even the main roads were made of gravel. Today's section would take us from Cooperpedy to Mcandrew, over 620 kilometres with 2 long stages promised. Now it was really starting to turn into a marathon, and we were a long way from home. In the background you can hear a passing local giving us a typical Aussie greeting.
Where are all you mad buggers heading for?
It's a long way to anywhere from here, apart from the rubbish tip perhaps. We still hadn't reached the lunch halt, and spending so much time on these long desert roads was causing us to hallucinate. Why else would we think that this huge water tank looked a bit like a dog? And of course, this wasn't really a flower, was it? And it just got weirder and weirder. Apart from the wind, this place was just peaceful, calm, and a little bit surreal, it has to be said. And then back to reality with the afternoon stages.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It was now clear that Mcandrew seemed to have been biding his time so far in this rally, as he proceeded to pulverise everyone else again on the day's 2 stages, being over 30 seconds quicker than the next fastest crew. And his version of the middle of the road is quite different to mine. But if this is keeping it in the middle, I'd hate to see it when he's trying. Certainly everyone else was trying their hardest, but Mcandrew wasn't just in a different class, he was at a different school. No, this isn't a special stage that we're on. This is the main road from Birdsville to Indora. 400 kilometres of dusty, rocky road. We're overtaking any car in an adventure in itself. But we've got 400 kilometres to do. It'll take us only about 3.5 hours because you can actually average 80 to 90 miles an hour on these roads. But it's really, really hard work. It's, you know, this is a different type of driving, a different type of endurance, both for the car and the driver. The next day started without Jimmy McRae, and so did Joe Mcandrew ease up? Not a bit of it. He was nearly 2 minutes faster than anyone else on the first stage of the day. The event's longest so far at nearly 35 miles. 2 minutes! It was almost as if he'd got proper pace notes, or had even seen it before, or had got a turbocharger or something. Astonishing. Unbelievable, really. Once again, these were stages that really suited the long-legged power of the historic cars, all of which had more power than any of the modern cars, but with no disrespect intended, weren't being driven by drivers with quite the same experience as the front runners. Further ahead, the washaways were showing how important it was to have plenty of suspension travel.
That's not a gully. We'll be lucky to get out of there.
It's fast lane.
So at the end of a long, tough day, there was obviously only one question. Where was Jimmy McRae, and what had happened to his car?
It's the end of a tow rope for the next 700 kilometres.
Been towed all the way to Roma.
760, but he's counting.
We'll actually be quicker than the road section because KC's towing us.
Who's going to be sitting in the car?
Unfortunately, me.
Oh, God. You're going to scare him?
I'm going to give it my best shot.
Even though he took a brief leave of absence from the event and was therefore disqualified, Simon Glover was still running as a leading historic car on the road. And although his car was starting to sound pretty rough, he was still the fastest historic on the first stage here, just ahead of Paul Darrowset in the Capri. But Darrowset reversed that on the next stage to be 10 seconds quicker than Glover. And almost matching them, but not quite, was the other Mark 1 Escort of Anthony Ward and Mark Soloway. But at least they had the consolation of holding a nice 25-minute lead over Gary and Rex Leeson's Falcon for overall historic honours. We were doing the same stage twice here, and it was a great one. Pretty smooth, fairly slippery, but quite flowing. There were just a few too many blind high-speed crests for my liking.
330 over crest into right left chicane.
That made it all a bit unnerving at times. Rallying doesn't get much better than this. Wide open, fast sweeping roads, slippery without being dangerous, undamaged by world rally cars running ahead of you, and not a cloud in the sky. I know that I have whinged and moaned throughout about how uncompetitive our car had been, but we never let that detract from the fact that here we were, competing on the London to Sydney Marathon, one of the world's longest, toughest and most famous rallies. Yes, here we were, in Australia. In many respects, I regard these long-distance events as true rallying. There are no pace notes, no maps, no practice periods, no recce. You just drive the stages as you see them. And really, isn't that what rallying should be about? Indeed used to be about, not knowing what's over the next crest, or around the next corner. None of this moaning that the rallying is unsafe without a gravel crew, or your notes weren't quite right. And then keep your car going as well, for day after day after day. And yourself, of course, because the endurance is there for your mind and body, just as much as it is for your car. It's rallies like the London to Sydney Marathon and the World Cup rallies, which to my mind are real rallies, because they test everything to the limit, not the high-speed sprints that you tend to get nowadays. Why else would crews come from all around the world to take part in this event? We were now resigned to running for the rest of the rally on standard rear shock absorbers, and I was a bit wary of them. After all, standard shock absorbers aren't built to be used like this. But then neither are standard cars, to be honest.
This stuff's so slippery.
Good fun though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is good fun.
What a shame for us then, that just as the stage has become the best that we have seen on the rally so far, our car is at its worst. And we were having to take it easy over even the gentlest of bumps, just in case the back end bounced too high in the air. It's the last day of the London to Sydney Marathon, and the only thing people are talking about is the great dice for 11th place between Jimmy McRae and me. How ridiculous is that? Can the 5 times British Rally champion, 7 times Circuit of Ireland winner, 2 times Irish Rally champion beat the television presenter, the bloke off the telly? We're 1 minute and 38 seconds ahead of him. Can he do it? I think so, don't you? One battle that did appear to be settled though was a contest for top historic car. How are you feeling this morning?
Very good, very good.
Yeah.
Two stages to go. First classic in the bag, we hope.
We hope, yep.
Yeah.
What's your gap to the next one?
About 12 minutes.
So that's like, you could have 2 maximums really.
We could, yeah, but we don't want road penalties,
No,
so
no.
just cruise through now,
Yeah.
get to the end.
Can you keep him under control or does he get a bit mad?
No, he's right. It's a bit early for him, so it's not too bad now. In the afternoon he starts to go wild.
Does he?
Yeah.
For the final time, we all made our way onto the stages. This was the 30th day. There had been almost 50 stages, and yet no one seemed to be easing up. Especially Jimmy McRae, who was so keen to overtake us. And Ian Begg, who had his best stage result of the rally, with second here. Well, maybe Joe Mcandrew eased up a bit. He was only 3rd quickest on this stage for his worst result since somewhere in India. But he certainly wasn't about to throw it all away now. Shane Merlin couldn't believe his luck that he was now 3rd, and although he appeared to be taking it easy, he had engine problems for quite some time, and was fortunate that he was still going so well. And Mike Montgomery was determined that nothing would happen to him at this late stage. Nor to Anthony Ward, who'd driven almost faultlessly on the whole event to take the biggest win of his rally career. We had things on our mind though. We were trying to hold off Jimmy McRae, which are words I thought I'd never say. And we thought that these last few stages were fantastic.
You just have to wonder why all the stages can't be like this, don't you?
We try so hard, and yet we look so slow. But never mind, we've been extremely lucky with our car, and we're going to get to Sydney, whatever our position. Jimmy McRae was fastest on the stage, but big shock to us, he didn't go past us in the standings.
So here we are, about to start the last stage of the 2004 London to Sydney Marathon. Here we go.
400, right left chicane over bridge. Right left chicane over bridge.
So, do you think that we could hold off Jimmy McRae? Of course we couldn't. But it wasn't for lack of trying, and when you think of all the problems that had beset some of the larger teams, I think that we'd done pretty well, to be honest. And these were the final results. First, second and third were the New Zealand Hondas, brilliantly prepared and superbly organised by John Mcandrew. Not a professional rally driver at all, but a plumber. Fourth was the first of the Toyotas, Graham Lorimer and Nick Starkey. An excellent fifth, taking it just at the end, went to Ian Begg and Alan Diffie in another Toyota. And sixth were Anthony Ward and Mark Soloway in the Escort. And as we ourselves crossed the finishing line in front of the Sydney Opera House, we were 12th. We were happy. We were exhausted. We were glad it was over, and we had a head full of memories. Not in any way nervous as we set off on this great adventure.
Make sure you just get your time. Don't worry about anything. Let's get your time.
There's one pair of black marks going over the edge early on, but I didn't know who it was.
I thought doing these international rallies was supposed to be glamorous.
He just told that if he didn't go back, he'd shoot them.
And we're trying to avoid dogs, cows, goats and other traffic.
hobbled on the edge for what seemed like 10 years, and then boom, boom, boom. And there we are, 100 feet down in the bush.
If anybody ever offers you the chance to do a rally in India, don't think twice about it. Don't do it.
Stage up.
90% of Bob's life is a crisis, the rest is a drama.
It had been long, tough. It hadn't always been enjoyable. But it most certainly had been a marathon. And we had done it. We had completed the London to Sydney Marathon. And it doesn't get much better than that.
That was bloody unbelievable.